Welcome to Unit 4 on linear equations and linear systems. This is lesson 841, number machines, solving number puzzles. In this lesson, we'll use inverse operations to solve equations and simplify expressions by eliminating parentheses and combining like terms. Before we get into the notes for this first lesson, and really the notes that we'll use for the first 3 lessons, I wanted to talk about how things are going to be a little bit different than we traditionally do with Desmos. If we look at the calendar for this unit, we can see that in this first week, we have a lot of supplemental puzzles that are going to help us to develop our equation solving skills. We'll be looking at Desmos to see how they help us to visualize what's happening in an equation with balancing machines and number machines, but the real practice is going to come from the puzzles that we'll be doing together. So that's really what our notes are going to focus on, looking at the steps for solving equations in a more traditional way, and then doing a few problems from each of the puzzles as examples. That's what we'll do in the first week, and by the end of this first week, you'll have an excellent foundation if you do all of the practice for the steps you need to take to solve any equation. After that, we'll return to Desmos in the lessons that come after, and look at some other tips and tricks that might help us in certain situations. Let's get started with the notes for solving equations. The notes that we're taking today are really notes that'll work for the first 3 lessons. In fact, we're not going to be working out of your math notebook for lessons 1, 2, or 3. We're just going to be taking some other notes that will help you to solve equations every time, and then just focusing on different parts of those steps. So for lessons 841 to 843, these are the notes and their steps for solving equations. And the first step that we're going to be focusing mostly on today has to do with simplifying expressions in an equation before we actually start balancing to solve. So let's write simplify each side of the equation if needed. We did a puzzle before the break where we didn't need to do any simplifying, but what you're going to be looking to see is there any way that we can eliminate parentheses? I'm going to write distribute to eliminate parentheses. Sometimes an equation doesn't have parentheses, so clearly you wouldn't do that. But if that'll help us to simplify the equation, we do that. And the other thing we look at the terms and see if we can combine any like terms. Combine like terms. So that first step, we're not really solving anything, we're just making the problem look a little easier to deal with. Once we have both sides of the equation simplified as much as we can, then we actually start solving. We're going to say add or subtract on both sides of the equation. To isolate the variable term. We'll talk about what the variable term is when we get into it. And then once we do that, there's just really one more step. We're going to multiply or divide on both sides to solve for the variable. Multiply or divide on both sides of the equation. To solve for the variable. And then you'll be done. So these are the notes that we're going to refer to for each of the first 3 lessons. We're just going to zero in on some aspect of these steps in each little puzzle. So much as I love Desmos, they really don't give you enough practice with working through equations. So we're going to be using some puzzles this week, 3 different puzzles this week, and getting some real muscle memory for what to do. And the first puzzle that we're going to be doing a few problems from is this one, where we have lots of equations to solve. And in all of these equations, there's something we need to simplify. That's going to be our focus for today. We're going to simplify each side of an equation by looking for an opportunity to eliminate parentheses with the distributive property, or combine like terms, or both. So let's do a few problems like we did in class so that you can see how this is done. This is puzzle number 210. It's today's assignment. Let's start with the first problem and follow these 3 steps to solve it. It's a puzzle, so the first problem is problem I. We're going to start by just writing down the equation. It's 5 multiplied to, and this is in parentheses, x plus 4. Close those parentheses, and that's equal to 40. Now I'm going to take a moment just to make a little line here so that you can see that we have this expression on the left side of the line, this side of the equation, and 40 on the right side of the equation. And before we actually start solving this, we're going to see if we can make it look a little easier. We're going to simplify if we can. Now, on the right side of this equation, it doesn't get any simpler than one number. I can't simplify this. There's no parentheses to get rid of, and there's no like terms. There's just one term there. So I don't need to simplify the right side. But on the left side, let's look and see if we can simplify that. In our notes, it says there's only 2 things to check for. The first thing is, can we distribute to get rid of some parentheses? Well, yes, we can. We're going to use the distributive property, which says that I'm going to multiply this number in front of the parentheses by every term that's in the parentheses. So let's go ahead and eliminate those parentheses. 5 times x is 5x. 5 times positive 4 is positive 20. Don't just write 5x and 20. Make sure you have a plus sign in between them. And nothing changes on the other side. All right, now I'm going to look and see if there's anything else I can simplify here. Well, just looking at this, I got rid of the parentheses. I see 2 terms. There's a variable term and a constant term. And you can't combine those 2. Later on in the assignment, you'll run into some things that you can combine. But those aren't like terms, so I'm done simplifying. I've distributed, there's no like terms, we can go on to step 2. Step 2 says we're going to be adding or subtracting on both sides of the equation. The same thing's going to happen on both sides of the equation. And our goal is to isolate the variable term. I want to get 5x all by itself on one side of the equal sign. It's not by itself right now. Right now we have 5x plus 20. And I need to think about how I can add or subtract to make that 20 disappear. And this is where the inverse operations from the Desmos activity kick in. Instead of adding 20, I can make that go away if I do the inverse of adding 20. But if I do that, I have to keep the equation balanced. Whatever I do to one side of the equation, I have to do the same thing to the other. And the reason we did that is, look what happens when we take positive 20 and negative 20 and put them together. It's just 0. It cancels right out. So on the left side of this equation, I'm only left with 5x. And on the right side, 40 minus 20 is 20. So we've taken care of step 2. We subtracted on both sides of the equation, and we isolated the variable term 5x. So step 3, there's only one thing left to do. We're going to multiply or divide on both sides of the equation to solve for the variable. So we're just trying to get that variable alone now. Right now, that variable is multiplied to 5. And the inverse of multiplying by 5 is dividing by 5. 5 divided by 5 is just 1. It cancels to 1. So I'm just left with 1x. Now, mathematicians don't tend to write the 1 in front of a variable. If I just have 1 of something, I just write the letter. Nothing wrong with doing it this way, except that mathematicians will laugh and laugh if you do. So when I divided by 5, I was just left with the variable on the left side. And on the right side, 20 divided by 5 is 4. Let's circle our answer. So we've solved it with 3 steps. We simplified, we isolated the variable term, then we isolated the variable. Now you don't have to check your work tonight, but I just wanted to show you. If you did want to check your work, you could just substitute 4 in wherever you see x in this equation. So if this is my original equation, I could even do this in my head if I was in a hurry. I could just change this x to a 4. That's what I just decided my answer was. And let's see if that works. Well, 4 plus 4 is 8. 5 times 8 is 40. Looks like it worked. You're not required to do this in the assignment tonight, but I do need you to show every step nice and neatly like this. Let's do a second one. It'll go a little faster this time. This is problem E. Negative 2 times, in parentheses, we have 3y minus 7 equals 56. Again, I'm going to write a little line so I can see the left side from the right side. And clearly this left side, we're going to see if we can simplify it a little bit. First step in looking for simplifying opportunities is to see if we can eliminate the parentheses. This problem is good for making sure that we keep track of all of our negative signs. I'm distributing a negative 2. Negative 2 times 3y is negative 6y. And let's be super careful with the second thing. This is really a negative 7. Negative 2 times negative 7 is positive 14. That's equal to 56. Once we're here, everything is simplified that we can simplify. So let's try and isolate that variable term. We can subtract 14 to do that. Adding and subtracting is our first step. The positive 14 and negative 14 cancel. 56 minus 14 is 42. And now we're going to multiply or divide to get the variable alone. I know you're looking at this and thinking, oh, that's subtracting 6, so I'll add 6 to both sides. But that's not the case here. This isn't a math operation. This is just a negative sign. So if I have negative 6 multiplied to y, and I'm looking to multiply or divide to get y alone, I'm just going to divide by exactly the same thing. Negative 6 divided by negative 6 is positive 1. So this just cancels to positive 1y. I'm not going to write the 1 in front of it. And then 42 divided by 6 is negative 7. So that's how we'll tackle this homework. If you're ready to charge into the rest of this assignment, you're welcome to. But there is one more, you can stop the video now if you're ready, but there's one more problem that we did together in class that I'll do here now that's a little more tricky. So let me flip the page if you're still interested in seeing one of the last problems on this assignment. So I'm going to go a little bit out of order here. And on the puzzle, I'm going to do this third from the last problem, Q. Go ahead and write it down and talk about why it's a little more difficult. So for Q, we have 5 times 4 plus 2x minus 8, minus, and in parentheses, we have 8x minus 12. I think you'll probably already be able to see why this is a little more complicated. I'm still going to follow the same steps, though. The first step is to see if I can simplify this side. The 68 won't be a problem, but I've got 2 sets of parentheses that I need to deal with. So I'm going to ask myself, what's the number in front of the first set of parentheses? Well, it's 5. I'm going to distribute that 5 here in just a moment to eliminate those parentheses. The trickier question is, what's the number in front of this set of parentheses? And it's actually -1. They just didn't write the 1 there, but that's what you're distributing. It's really just going to flip all of the signs on those terms. So let's go ahead and do this last problem that's a little more involved. Let's eliminate these first parentheses. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 2x is 10x. Make sure you write the plus sign to separate those terms. So we're done with the first set of parentheses. And in the second set of parentheses, remember we're distributing a -1. -1 times 8x is -8x. Just flipped it from a positive to a negative. And -1 times -12 is +12. Just flipped it from a -12 to a +12. So we've eliminated the parentheses. We're going to check now to see, can we combine any of these terms? There's 4 terms here. Here's one, here's one, here's one, and here's one. They're separated by plus and minus signs. And the 2 middle ones are variable terms that I can combine. If I take 10x and subtract 8x, that's 2x. And I can also combine the first and the last one. Those are just constant terms. 20 plus 12 is 32. So in this one, I had to eliminate parentheses, and I also had to combine like terms so that I had a nice simplified equation. And now we'll proceed on to adding or subtracting on both sides to isolate that variable term. Subtract 32. That leaves me with 2x, that canceled out, equals 36. And then we need to multiply or divide to isolate that variable. We're going to divide by 2. 2 divided by 2 cancels to 1. So I'm just left with 1x equals 18. So let me go back to these notes. These are the notes that we're going to be using for the first 3 lessons. Today is very much about making sure that we can simplify each side of the equation using the distributive property and by combining like terms. Make sure you show all of your work as you finish all the problems in the puzzle tonight.